What can men do against such reckless hate?
Well, we can take the piss out of it. We all know that The Rings of Power Season 1 didn't exactly have the most positive of receptions, despite it apparently being the most watched show on Prime. So as the lead up for Season 2 began, the promotional material had to play a major role in getting people to watch it. But instead, they just had quotations from people who probably got paid to be positive. It doesn't help that Season 2 is off to such a rough start. The first scene has Sauron demand loyalty from the orcs, but in response, they decide to kill him? The writers said that this opening was going to make you feel sorry for Sauron, to give some extra dimensions to his character, and maybe even be on his side, but this is a really lazy way of doing it. If you want me to sympathise with a character, don't choose the one person who up to this point was famous for being pure evil. The Lord of the Rings portrayed him as the unequivocal bad guy that Middle-earth had to defeat. Now you're telling me that he was unjustly removed from leadership after wanting peace. Why do the villains need to have additions made to their characters, despite it being a direct contradiction to how many people view them? Moral greyness is not the answer to everything. It's okay to have a villain that is completely evil. But the orcs have families now, so feel sorry for them. But now we have to watch Sauron get killed, which is what everyone wants, and then exist as some insipid black goo for an undetermined amount of time. Am I meant to feel sorry for the floppy discharge? You've diminished one of the greatest villains in cinema to a sad, flopping pile of goo. He then takes the form of Halbrand for some reason, and then manages to come across a bunch of people who've recently been attacked by orcs. Halbrand then has a lengthy conversation with this guy, and he points to the carnage the orcs have caused. The distance of the flames seems no more than a mile away, and yet they're happy to just stroll along as they come out of the trees. The threat is so close to them, and yet they're fine. Are they not more concerned that they could be pursued? Halbrand then joins them on the boat we meet him on in Season 1, and he decides to almost be a nice guy. He senses that the sea creature is about to attack, and he tells the old guy to grab onto something. But then once the chaos starts, and he gets pinned under a wooden beam, he just leaves him there and steals the man's badge that bears the crest of the King of the Southlands. Because it turns out he's actually evil all along. So what do the writers want from me? To want him to succeed after being betrayed by the orcs? Or to recognise that he's just evil? He was the lieutenant of Morgoth, which means he's bad. So now I'm just confused what the point of this embarrassing development he went on was. The prologue went on for nearly 20 minutes, just so we could see how Sauron ended up on the boat when he met Galadriel. But we didn't need to see it. I thought the writers knew that by not bothering to show us it in Season 1. It's still outrageously contrived for Galadriel to stumble across that boat. They didn't bother to fix that blunder and instead showed us Sauron's backstory, even though the information is almost meaningless anyway. They somehow managed to make the start of Season 1 even worse. Sauron died and then randomly exploded before turning into some weird black goo. But everyone survived despite the force of the blast and the fact that it turned everything around it to ice. Since when could Sauron control things like this? Or is it just some crazy thing that happens when he dies? What are Halbrand's powers exactly? Why doesn't he destroy the orcs himself? What specifically is anyone's plan? Fuck it doesn't matter. Picking up with Halbrand from where we left off in Season 1, he is taken before Adar. Instead of just getting to the point, they dance around the subject for ages until Halbrand finally says that he has information about Sauron, which is when we get some interesting dialogue. Adar says to tell him what he knows, or he'll spill the words from his throat, which is an odd thing to say, since words come from the mouth. And in response, Halbrand says that if Adar kills him, everything he knows dies with him. That's a reasonable thing to say, but it is something that Adar should already know. Don't kill him, otherwise you won't know anything. But anyway, he's imprisoned by Adar and made to work or something. But why has Halbrand come here? What's his plan? He might as well go straight to Celebrimbor and deceive him into making more rings. That was obviously the plan all along, and yet he detours to Mordor before going to Eregion. He accomplishes nothing, and then has to travel hundreds of miles to commence his plan B. If he wants the orcs to fight the elves, then what makes him think that this isn't already part of Adar's plan? The orcs are amassing in Mordor for a purpose. They're not just here to hang around. The show then makes it look like he makes the journey to meet Celebrimbor in about 30 seconds. Middle-earth is big. But never mind. We're even told that some elves saw Halbrand enter Mordor and so don't see him as a threat at the moment. But they managed to not see him clearly leave Mordor when heading to Eregion, because that would mean the plot can't happen. The selective competence of the elves in this episode is really dragging down how endeared we should be to them. The boredom really kicks in when everyone is just stating their motivations to each other. The subtext is barely a thing and gives no reason for anyone to concentrate. Just enjoy the pretty colours and turn your brain off. Galadriel won't even tell anyone that Halbrand is actually Sauron. It's in the best interest of everyone in Middle-earth to let them know what's happened, and yet she dare not tell them because it might make her look bad. They eventually find out that Sauron helped them make the rings, and yet the elves decide to use them anyway. They could do anything, and they're like, we have to, just in case not using them is worse. But for all you know, using them is more likely to be more corruptive. But never mind, just because it turns out well doesn't mean it was the right choice in the first place. Elrond seems to be the only smart person in the episode, and even escapes with the rings by jumping off a cliff he definitely shouldn't survive jumping off. He goes to find a new elf and tasks him with destroying the rings, and they decide to drop them into the sea. But just as he's about to, the boat gets rocked and he drops the rings on the floor. And so he decides not to do anything and brings them back to shore. What was the point of this? What made him change his mind? Some random arbitrary moment means the rest of the series is going to happen. Anyway, Elrond is convinced to return to Lindon and give back the rings despite still disagreeing with this choice. When the ceremony begins, he manages to startle Gil-galad, causing him to drop the rings. Elrond only said no, and somehow this made Gil-galad throw open his hand. The Elven King is surprised by someone shouting no. By complete luck, one of them falls down some steps and stops right in front of Galadriel. She picks it up and puts it on, and no one objects. Is there not going to be some selection process for who gets to wear the rings? Especially because of the power they possess. I guess that since she's so perfect, she's just allowed to. Besides, shouldn't Elrond be banned from attending this ceremony? He committed treason, but I guess if he needs to surprise Gil-galad into throwing the rings around, then we shouldn't care. And that's it for episode 1. I can't wait to see Tom Bombadil, the Balrog, the battles, the Barrow-wights, the rings, Mount Doom, Sauron's crown. The whole episode is banking on nobody concentrating, so the writers can get away with having arbitrary decisions govern the events. It's lazy, incompetent writing. Just watch House of the Dragon instead, guys. Don't watch this substanceless sack of shit that's so adamant on crafting a story that fails on every single level.